All right, welcome everyone to this panel, Investing in Fit for Purpose Sustainable Data Architecture. I'm delighted to have a panel of extremely distinguished panelists with lots of experience in this topic. And I think we're gonna have a really robust and interesting discussion. There are no decks, there are no presentations. We just want to chat about some of the key challenges that we often face, both as funders and implementers, in thinking about how do we move beyond, investing in project-based digital architecture to something that's more sustainable, that's more long-lasting for countries, which is all of our goals. So as a reminder of the format, it's 45 minutes long, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the floor. There's a Q&A sidebar chat session where you can post your questions. We'll also be opening it up to video. So for those of you bold enough to show yourselves, you can join and you can submit a request to present yourself and ask your question via video as well. I am Hannah Cooper. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cooper Smith. We're one of the co-organizers of this year's event, and we're delighted to be here with you all. We focus on using data to improve health and development worldwide. And I have to say that on this panel today, I'm just delighted that we have some of our favorite colleagues, partners, implementers who just have a ton of experience, and it's really nice to see you all here today. Even though we can't be physically together, it's just great to see all of your faces together. So I just wanted to do some brief introductions so you know who we are, and then I will kick it off and get started with a little bit of framing and then hit it off with some questions for the panelists. So today we are joined by Dr. Boukari Ouedraogo, who's the Director of Health Information Systems for Burkina Faso's Ministry of Health. Bonjour, docteur. He holds a doctorate in health with a specialization in medical informatics and epidemiology. He is a permanent member of the Pierre Fabre Foundation's eHealth Experts Committee. He's also supported several countries in the development of their health information system strategic documents. And in his current position, he leads the strategic project management of health information systems and deployment of digital health technologies within the ministry in Burkina Faso. Welcome, Dr. Ouedraogo. Next we have Next, we have Meghaniso Manaway, who is a senior technical advisor to Malawi's Ministry of Health. And he has worked on improving Malawi's health management information systems for many years. He, in many respects, is the digital history of the Ministry of Health. Ask him anything about why a system was created, the process, and how we wound up where we are, and he knows the answer. So we're delighted to have him with us. He's led on implementing DHIS2, the District Health Information System for Malawi. He's really focused on increasing the use of health data in decision-making and driving the national dialogue on M&E. He leads a number of technical working groups and sub-technical working groups within the Ministry of Health. And he holds a master's in science and informatics, and he also has an MBA. Welcome, Meghaniso. I think you're on mute, but I think we see your lips move and say welcome. So nice to have you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Charles Holmes, who's the director of the Georgetown Center for Innovation in Global Health. And he's a professor of medicine at Georgetown University Medical Center. And he also serves as a distinguished scholar and program director at the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law. Dr. Holmes served as chief medical officer and deputy US Global AIDS coordinator for PEPFAR that was housed in the Department of State in the US, and served as founding director for the Office of Research and Science. He was also the CEO for the Center of Infectious Disease Research in Zambia, called CIDRS. He's a frequent advisor to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the WHO, where he serves as the co-chair of WHO's Global Working Group service quality. And in his current at Georgetown, he provides strategic support to governments, multilaterals, private sector organizations to help improve health systems responses to epidemics and other diseases, research to optimize health systems performance. Then lastly, we have Cassie Morgan, who is the Kunika Sustainability Coordinator, which is a large program that we support in Malawi. And her role focuses on project management, financial oversight, and organizational systems and capacity development. She works alongside Malawi's Ministry of Health and focuses on strengthening and ensuring high quality, routinely available data for decision making. She coordinates a team of 28 staff who are part of the ministry's digital health division. And Cassie has a BSc in biology and neuroscience and an MPH from the University of Southern California. Welcome, Cassie.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So as many of you know who've worked in the digital health sphere for a number of years now, we often have this challenge where we have funding from partners that come in, want to support certain priorities, and then we do a lot of work in digital technology and digital health, and then the project ends. And so we're left struggling with a challenge about how can the ministry or governments continue these programs on? Where is additional support coming in? How does this align with national visions and national priorities? How are we shifting from this project-based cycle to a longer-term sustainable vision for digital health that really focuses on improving patient outcomes? And I think the question that I wanted to ask a lot of you here today is, do we have a sense that things have changed in the last 5 years? Are we moving away from a project-based approach to a more sustainable approach? Or are we still stuck in a similar situation where we're going from project to project that is largely based on funding priorities by donors? And so have things changed? Have they evolved? What are you seeing and feeling as implementers and experts in this space? What are some of the trends that you've noticed? How do these decisions by funders affect your daily implementation of the programs that you run? We have some interesting guiding frameworks that the digital health community has developed and evolved over time. We have the OpenHIE. We're doing a lot of work in interoperability, but has that really changed the reality on the ground? And we have some nice examples of that work, but are things moving in what we would think the right direction is? So as people who are deeply involved in these issues, both from a sort of funding, advisory, strategic side to an implementation and policy setting side at the country level, how have things changed? Are they changing? Are we moving in the right direction? And this is what I really want us to discuss today. So I'm going to start with Dr. Ouedraogo, and I would really like to hear your experience in Burkina Faso. You're leading the digital health agenda for Burkina. What are some of the trends that you've noticed in terms of what partners are interested in funding? And do those match with what Burkina and your vision is for digital health in the country? So over to you, Dr. Ouedraogo.
Okay, thank you very much for first of all, I would like to thank you very much for the invitation. It is my pleasure to participate in this panel. For your question, I think it's an excellent question. And for my experience in Faso, we faced to the challenge. And we did a mapping of the implementation in Israel, and we knew that it is a application, different application which are implemented in national health, and we want to a data warehouse, a data center where we capitalize all application in our data center, and currently we are going to to do a data warehouse where we will rebuild a database for decision making. And our experience that we, we capitalize in other countries, we notice that sometimes we can implementation in the Ministry of Health not uh, connected with the reality of the Ministry of Health. And I think funding has to be aligned with the national priorities and be connected from national values. And for Burkina Faso, we also try to put together all commissioners and to show them the vision of the Minister of Health. But we have to avoid the vertical implementation, and all funding for partners have to take into account uh, the, the vision for Minister of Health, but we had to have, before to implement new application, we have to be sure that this application is different from the application uh, we are going to use in Ministry of Health. But the big challenge uh, for now in Ministry of Health, but we don't we know some funding for some partner, but we try to integrate in the Ministry of Health, not every time same vision of the current data that we have collected. I would like to say one example that noticed 2 years ago. That some partners try to collect some data in district and implement implement it is the software, but there are previously application that Ministry of Health use to collect information for Ministry of Health, but it collect some collected some information, but are not uh, disconnected with our reality, and where some lack information, but they collected and they are not capitalized and they were not integrated with national information system. In this challenge, I think in many countries in West Africa, that I also uh, did some experience, some expertise. I noticed that in all in our country, we have to make some to keep our vision and to 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 oblige but to try to put all up there in the same panel and to show them that it is very important. If we have to collect some information, we have to be sure that the information are not collected previously with the national information system before to implement over information system. For information, I think it's very important country and for all developed country uh, to to show the that is very important for Ministry of Health to a platform that can first of all be used the their implemented information have to be used in uh, the local for to make decision before collect this information for the national level. It is very important. And also thing but I can also share with the families uh, in our market what we need all application what we use in Ministry of Health. Many of these applications collect collect some information that are not used in the local areas, and I think it is a mistake. We have to try to information that we have to collect is really important and are used at the local or the national level for decision making. Here,
Yeah,
some information I can share with you.
that's great. Thank you very much, Doctor. So just to kind of recap, again, demonstrating the value and importance of collecting data to inform national priorities, local priorities, eliminating some of these silos that are often created by different donor needs and requests for data, and really putting the onus on national priorities and local priorities in terms of data collection and use of data. Yeah, that's great. So we've been joined by Marty Gross from the Gates Foundation. So welcome, Marty. We're very happy to have you on as our token donor. So not to put you on the hot seat. Great to have you on. Just brief introduction for you. You are a senior program officer on the HIV team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and you support investing in optimizing models for delivery of HIV prevention and treatment program, strengthening country-led health information systems, digital tools and applications, and improved use of health data. Marty is also the HIV team's focal point for all investments in Malawi, and he has a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University. So welcome, Marty. And my next question was actually for you, so you showed up right on time. You know, I'm curious, from a funder's perspective, what are some of the key challenges that you've noticed in terms of priorities for digital health? What are you thinking about in terms of sustainability? Thinking about what Dr. Ouedraogo mentioned, how do you balance, you know, the need or talk to your colleagues at other organizations? They really want data to feed and inform their purposes. You know, Gates Foundation has a different model, but how do you think about some of these questions? And has there been a difference or a shift in the last 5 years? Are there things you and other partners are talking about now that you weren't talking about 5 years ago?
Thanks, Hannah, and hi, everyone, and profuse apologies for joining late. Of course, the donor in this session is going to be the one that has the problems with the technology here. But I'm glad I made it, and it's really great to be with all of you today. And thanks for the question. There's a lot there. I guess I'll start with I think the last part of your question around, you know, what, if anything, has changed in the last 5 years. I actually think that a lot has changed in the last 5 years in terms of the discussions among donors and the direction that donors are trying to go with in digital health. I think that there has been a realization, I would say, over the last 5 to 7 years that we as donors in global health are driving a lot of the fragmentation and a lot of the problems that we see in countries in terms of the coherence of digital architecture and data systems, and the ability to invest in and build data systems that are primarily of use by countries and by governments themselves. That we are often a large part of the source of the problem, because we are and have been investing primarily to feed the information needs of donor headquarters or donor accountability or program accountability, and haven't been paying attention to the needs for common coherent architecture at the country level. There have been a lot of really interesting efforts over the last 5 years to understand, what are the incentives in place that are making us do that? How can we behave differently? And are there models and examples that we can look to that have taken a different route, and that we could really understand the value in different approaches? I think one effort that I would point to is the donor alignment principles for donor alignment in digital health, that a group of donors, I think it's upwards of 30 now, have signed on to, that really commits donor organizations to behaving in a different way, to investing in core capabilities of governments in countries, to articulate a strategy, to articulate a architecture to put in place governance principles and to build their own capabilities that then donors and programs can sort of rely on for our own information needs rather than what we've been doing. I think that conversation in Washington, in Geneva, in Seattle has really shifted. I think there is that recognition now that we've been doing things poorly. What isn't quite happening yet is a operationalization of those principles on the ground in most countries. And what I see as well, there's a couple of major challenges there. I think one, the sort of group of donors that have come together to articulate these different approaches and principles is really functioning at the global level. It's one thing to agree to something in Washington, D.C., in Geneva, in Seattle. It's quite a different thing to actually figure out how to put that in place in however many hundreds of countries donors may be investing in, because each situation, each country is going to have some unique needs, unique dynamics, unique politics. Capacities are going to be at different levels. And so figuring out how to comprehensively and coherently change the way we behave in each of the countries that we are operating in or investing in, I think has really proven to be challenging. Where I've seen this go really well is when we actually make a direct investment to a government or to a partner that is directly supporting a government to stand up or support or reinforce or strengthen the core governance capability of the government to play the lead coordination role in ensuring that all the multiple donors that are working in that country or investing in that country are investing against a common plan and strategy. That takes muscle, that takes resources, and that takes, frankly, sometimes a flipping of the power script in terms of who has decision-making power about how money is used. But I've seen in Tanzania, I've seen in Malawi, I've seen in Zimbabwe, and other countries examples of where we're really starting to see progress because we've invested directly in governments. Governments are able to take the lead in coordination and in enforcement of coordination against that common strategy. So I do have hope that we're starting to see some new pathways, and that we're starting to actually get some data about how this actually proves to be a more cost-effective and impactful approach to achieving what we want to achieve in the first place. So there isn't actually this kind of false trade-off between investing centrally and coherently in national architecture and getting what donors need out of in terms of our own data needs. I think the more we start to prove that out, the more we're going to see actual shifts in how this type of coordination happens on the ground. What I'd really like to see is in the next phase, investors like the Global Fund, like Gavi, who are major donors for kind of core health systems in countries, start to take these examples and invest directly in the governance mechanisms and capabilities of countries as a core part of how they do business, so that we start to see across countries the kind of proliferation of these strong, capacitated governance structures that are what I think are really the key to driving the coherence in how the rest of us are investing.
Thanks, Marty. That was great. I mean, I think you raise an interesting point. Are funders going to, or are they interested in funding governance structures and governance coordination capabilities in country? It's harder for bilateral donors to explain, perhaps to their taxpayers, that they're investing in strengthening governance and capacities rather than building X thing. So I think that's going to be an interesting tension, and looking to countries to see what we can demonstrate concretely in the next couple of years to make the case for donors, particularly bilateral and otherwise. I mean, I think this is a nice way to turn to Cassie, who spends her day coordinating, working within the Ministry of Health with a team of 28 developers and other staff for leading the digital health division there with the ministry. And so just wanting to hear from you, Cassie, do you feel any of this on the ground? You know, are the sort of donor priorities affecting your day-to-day? Have you felt a shift, or are you guys just, you know, head down, focused on delivering digital solutions based on, you know, to support the ministry? So how is this resonating for you on the ground in terms of your day-to-day and the work that you do?
No, this definitely resonates. As the digital health division, we are, you know, built to be nimble and responsive to needs, but of course we have to balance that with the funder priorities. And those are something that are always front and center as the grant is initiated. So nothing really comes as a surprise. We completely understand what the objectives are, the activities, the deliverables, it's all clearly outlined. But what that means in relation to the MOH, and especially as a digital health division within the MOH, is that the funder priorities really, to echo some of what has been said already, have to be aligned to the objectives of the country. So looking at the digital health strategy, looking at the health sector strategic plan and other key strategies, we need to follow that and allow leadership to happen there. And then in relation to the funder, as we look at those activities and those objectives, we have to be, you know, communicative about what's actually happening on the ground. You know, some things, the priorities may shift from the MOH and things, you know, there may be certain roadblocks that come into place. There may be successes. And so being able to communicate that, update our funders and really paint a vivid picture is really, really critical. But in the day as a DHD, we have to be responsive to the government of Malawi and to partners. And so this happens in very common ways. For example, a new system comes online. And we want to make sure that is aligned to the national architecture and that it's feeding in so there aren't, as Dr. Way-Cargo said, no gaps in information, that the government has access to this. And of course, we want to be nimble and responsive when things like the COVID pandemic happened. We want to be able to deploy systems, make sure they're aligned, make sure they're interoperable, and all those things are happening. So we can't always say yes. Now is usually the outcome of it. We have to really have clear timelines, you know, really do a lot of project management and determine, you know, when those priority things come up, how we can adjust so that doesn't interfere with like really critical work and priorities. And make sure that in those outcomes that we're still focused on things like user-centered design, and those things don't get thrown on the wayside as we respond to donors and to the government of Malawi.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Cassie. I mean, you mentioned the importance of national strategies and really ensuring that the government is articulating what their vision is through those documents and using those as a way to orient funders to the government's priorities. It's interesting for you to hear you say that. I think sometimes there's a tendency for you know, partners to think, how important is the national strategy? Do we really need to develop this? What does this do practically on the ground? And so I think it's really helpful to hear you articulate the very tangible, practical benefit of having these national documents as we implement. So I just wanted to turn it to Meghaniso a little bit. You've been working in this space as a senior technical advisor to the Ministry of Health in Malawi for digital health. What's your experience been? You look back at the last 10 years, what's changed? Has anything changed? Better. Okay, let's try.
Okay, thanks. So, yes, there have been changes in the last 5-10 years. Especially regarding to the effort on digital health, effort from government, effort from donors. Some of the key notable changes is that there has been increased usage and demand for digital solutions within government. I think now there is interest from the frontline staff to use in service delivery. So I think that's a key change. And I think within the same period, I think building on the effort that led to the development of the principles for donor alignment, I think which Marty has also alluded to. That effort has also led into increased funding towards digital health. I think comparatively 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I think teams were struggling to get resources to implement digital health. So I think that is a big change. And also, I think of late, the we
Okay, thank you, Meghaniso. Just to recap what you said, I think so increased demand for digital solutions, particularly by frontline healthcare workers, and also increase in funding from partners, which is pretty exciting. And Charles, this actually is a nice segue over to you, because you have seen tangibly what the benefits of leveraging technology and data can mean in terms of improving quality of care on the ground. So it's interesting to hear Meghaniso talk about the interest of frontline staff in accessing and using digital tools, I'm assuming to improve quality of care. And I hear from you, I mean, you have some thoughts and like a great vision for this. What do you think the next frontier is? And we're already starting to see an uptick workers in terms of using digital tools and leveraging data, but what do you think is next, both in terms of what your discussions with Ministry of Health and sort of moving to more sustainable digital health solutions to improve quality of care?
Well, thanks, Hannah. That's a great question, and this has been such an interesting discussion with this amazing panel already. I'll try and add just a little bit to that. I guess when I think about sort of the next frontier, there are a couple things that come to mind. One is really new data streams that can provide better insight into program performance or risk environments. And the second piece that really excites me sort of from a programmatic perspective is sort of the integration or the synthesis of data streams that haven't previously come together before to basically raise the ability of decision makers to make better decisions. So maybe just to highlight a couple examples of that. First, on new data streams, for instance, in our work in Zambia, we found in the HIV program that there was very high loss to follow-up, and we did a series of studies to try and identify some of the causes of that from our HIV programs, I should say, but this would apply to most chronic disease programs, I think. And we did some discrete choice experiments to really hone in on why people were leaving care and what would potentially bring them back. And one of the biggest drivers that we found was that the patient experience, particularly at the patient-provider interface, was oftentimes an unfortunate driver of patients leaving care. And so with that in mind, we designed a program that would capture in a more routinized fashion the patient experience while in care as a means of trying to work that into our quality improvement programs. So using a system that digitally captured via SMS or USSD what a patient experienced during care during a particular clinic visit, feeding that back into a system that could provide a dashboard for a clinic manager, or provide information for a district as they looked across 40 or 50 sites. That then became actionable information that could be paired with curriculum for providers to help them elevate their patient-centeredness. Perhaps providers would need various new elements of support to be able to act on the data to try and improve the patient experience, which we believed, based on our data, would lead to better outcomes. So that's a step wedge study that's ongoing, but it's an example of trying to use a new data stream that hasn't previously been available. I think there are lots of good examples like that and some pretty low-hanging fruit that really excite me. I think there's also this amazing opportunity to bring in multiple data streams that haven't previously been kind of combined. And I think when you consider the needs we have within the HIV response globally, we're really stuck at about 1.7 million new infections every year, and we're having trouble pushing prevention programs to a sort of a new level of effectiveness. And at the same time, we have some interesting new data from Botswana that indicates, for instance, if you are able to keep girls in school one additional year, you reduce their HIV incidence by X amount, which is a great study because it begins to show you that we need multi-sectoral engagement and interventions if we're going to be able to reduce risk and create environments where young people can grow and thrive with less risk of HIV. So how do we, though, routinize that integration, right? Like, how do we bring together, say, at a city level, data on secondary education, attainment, retention, performance with other elements of the risk environment, whether that be poverty, whether that be recent immigration, whether that be trends in gender-based violence, which has obviously been a huge concern during COVID, to create a better picture of the risk environment and where there are programmatic opportunities to really intervene in some multi-sectoral ways. You know, I think oftentimes we're really siloed in our education responses, economic development responses, governance, investments in trying to improve local governance, and then disease-specific programs are kind of often on their own silos. So how do we knit some of that together, not in some grand way that's not linked to outcomes, but how do we kind of start with that data user, whether it's a city councilor or whether it's a community health worker or a district health medical officer who's trying to make better decisions. That's what really excites me the most is trying to consider not only these new data streams, but then how can they come to support better decision making. And I would say this is something that really is important, not just in these kinds of environments where you've got donor predominance, but I think around the world, these are really critical questions in wealthy countries and in countries that are low and middle income. Mm-hmm. So just a few ideas. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great, Charles. It's interesting to me because in a way, I think you picked up on some of the points that Dr. Ouedraogo mentioned at the beginning, which was, siloed data and really focusing on the needs of governance, and then tying that into some of the things that Marty and Cassie about the importance of governance structures and national strategies and the role that they can play potentially in breaking down these silos. And also putting the needs of the user at the center. And I think it will probably be incumbent upon us, particularly, as Meghaniso said, there's an uptake in demand for digital technologies and an increase in funding potentially as well. So to think about having the breaking down of silos, the leveraging of all of these data, thinking outside of the health box in terms of what's available, and putting the user at the core. So things that was great, and it was sort of nice to see that full circle in terms of comments and thoughts. Just to remind the audience that we're open now for Q&A. We have one question that's come in for Marty, actually, and the question is, to really understand, I think a lot of us have heard the interest in sustainability, the interest in investing in local partners, and local capacities before. I mean, for those of us who have worked in this field for 10 years or more, these are things that have always been there. So what do you think will actually, you talked about incentives a little bit. What are some of the donor incentives to push this forward? What do you think will actually make some of the change happen?
Thanks, Hannah. So fantastic question. I think I'm probably grappling with this alongside all of you. And as you say, Hannah, this is a topic of discussion that has existed as long as I have been in this field, which is, not a small amount of time. So I think we need to think about it in a couple of different ways. I think that donors are not a monolith, first of all. There are different types of donors with different incentives. And I think we need to focus on kind of differentiated expectations around which types of donors are going to invest in which types of things. And so donors like Global Fund, Gavi, GFF, who are really set up to invest in governments and in local systems, I think we need to call on them to continue to strengthen the way they are investing in the digital health governance and capabilities of governments and of local partners, because they are already set up to behave in that way, but often need a little bit more guidance about specifically what investments need to be made, what capabilities need to be built, what structures need to be in place to unlock the potential for digital health and data systems. If we do that correctly and well, then I think some of the other donors who are less able or less incented, some of the bilateral donors to invest directly in governments, we're still going to see the benefit of that, of their investment, the improved benefit of their investment, if the global funds of the world, for example, are investing in strong governance capabilities that can then help to harness the often larger or sometimes larger investments by the bilateral donors who may not be investing directly in government. So I think that's one question, is how do we think about a differentiated approach to what we're expecting the different types of donors to fund and how they fund. I think secondly, I think there is increased fiscal pressure on bilateral donors specifically to think about transition pathways, to think about different ways of investing. And frankly, there's risk that some of the bilateral donors may reduce funding, and so there's increased pressure to think about, okay, if anything that has been invested in over the last 30, 50 years through some of these bilateral agencies is to have lasting impact, we have to today now think about different approaches to investing for sustainability. Otherwise, there is the risk of running off the cliff and not leaving any sort of a legacy or leaving any sort of a sustained system or approach that can be carried forward after a large bilateral program winds down. And I think that incentive does change the nature of the game in terms of how bilateral donors are thinking about how they need to invest. And so we're starting to see, increased government-to-government mechanisms in place. We're starting to see an increased call for actual technical frameworks around sustainable investing. So I've got some hope that, what has always been a buzzword that we all say we are focusing on, we're actually starting to see some flesh being put on the bones about how to invest differently today. That said, though, just last comment, I don't think we're going to see, or nor should we expect to see, a wholesale transition to donors funding only governments or funding only local partners. I just don't think that's likely to happen. I do think we need to be specific about what we want to see invested in, call for those from the mechanisms that we think are most likely to support that type of investment, and then trust that we will see the impact across the range of investment that's coming in different channels.
Okay. Great, thanks for that. Next question is about, or maybe a comment. Charles's point about making data systems work for the doers is so spot on, driving the systems designed to respond to how to best support them in supporting their work and decision making. So yeah, I think this is another theme that has come up quite a bit in this panel. I think, it's very easy and seductive to develop a new technology or a new app because that's a very tangible thing. But again, throughout this discussion, we've heard the importance of putting the end user forward. If that's the Ministry of Health and their priorities, if that's the clinician at facility. So I think that's a really interesting point. We have 8 minutes left. We also wanted to open it up to other panelists to ask questions of each other if there are things that came up. So happy to open the floor to you all if there are things that we haven't touched on or that you wanted to ask of each other. No pressure. Charles.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks everybody for these great thoughts and comments. I'm really interested in the way in which both Malawi and Burkina Faso have been able to strengthen the digital health environment in a way that really it seems like will help to guide the government into a more focused, strengthened system, and also will create entry points for hopefully donors where that's necessary to align. And I think that we've seen that work in other areas, I think programmatically, particularly where governments, say, have made strong decisions around the scale up of say, antiretroviral therapy for treatment. These are the drugs they intend to use. These are the labs they intend to use. And it sort of helps to drive not only their leadership, but aligns and gets probably more effectiveness out of the available funding and what donors bring. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, any further reflections on key insights into how that's been done and how other countries can learn from your example?
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Charles. Dr. Ouedraogo, I think, again, this is a similar question that we asked you in the beginning, but how are you, given your position, driving the implementation of digital health in the ministry in Burkina, how are you encouraging the sort of coordination, governance, and pushing donors to align with your needs?
Thank you very much. For my question, I think for donors to trace power was application system. We made efforts to try to align our strategy in the same region. And we try for all levels for our health information system to for community level to data level. We are working to have some platform community level, the same platform, and it is this platform where we have to collect all information system with community health workers. We have to transmit to the health facility to have a continuum to check the patient from community level to facility level, and to the district level to the level. We are working to have the health information system, and for that, for the level, we have a the document that we work with all partners to have the vision of hospital level, but it's very important to avoid the fragmentation of the information system. It is not,
Yeah.
but we think it is very important to help the leadership of our system for system to push the ministry to have this plan and so to develop and implement this strategy to have the unit data warehouse that can use help to take the decision with all application which are being taken from community level to hospital level. It is not very easy, but we are very with our vision, and we have lucky because our ministry try to encourage our division, and also he make all his effort to say to all partners. It is very important to help the Ministry of Health to want the data for all data. And our mapping that we did encourage us to try to have a unique vision for the health information system, and we are working for this.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think really thinking about this link from community to facility, also, you know, thinking about sort of data center and data hosting. These are topics which I think is a whole, you know, we could have a whole other panel just on that. So I think those are all, and also again, importance of aligning with ministry's vision. Meghaniso, from the Ministry of Health side in Malawi, do you want to sort of have the last word and answer Charles's question? So I'll just turn it over to you. I know we have a few minutes left.
No, I think in terms of leadership, I think it's what Dr. Bukare has said, setting a clear vision for the ministry. I think having the right tools in place, the strategies, the policies, the standards, so that as we implement with partners, with donors, it guides us, all of us, between the donors and also the government, to build that environment which makes it possible to work together and to collaborate. So I think as we move forward, it seems we have a very good opportunity at this point, that there's a lot of awareness both from government side and from donor side in terms of improving health services by using digital solutions. So I think we can take advantage of what we have and make sure that we use this to improve the delivery of health services. Thank you.
I don't think I could have said it any better, Meghaniso. I think you wrapped us up just perfectly. So thank you for that. I think those are all the questions that we had. We have 1 minute left. I just wanted to thank those of you that attended, the panelists. I think this was a really exciting discussion. It definitely made me think a little bit more about the value of national strategies and the role that they can serve. And just really wanted to thank everybody for taking the time this afternoon, this morning, wherever you're dialing in from to participate. And hopefully we provided you with some interesting food for thought and takeaways. So thank you all for your time, and looking forward to seeing you hopefully next year in person. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.